about GA oil spill station. To understand more about this disaster and how it sparked, we need to take a look at the conflict that had caused it all. To begin, the armed conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, which is a Shia militant group, taking place between 12 July and 14 August of 2006, was triggered by Hezbollah fighters firing diversionary missiles into Israeli border towns and invading the border, killing soldiers and injuring civilians. Two soldiers were taken hostage by Hezbollah, who demand the release of Lebanese soldiers captured by Israel. So Israel had the Lebanese government accountable for the kidnappings and the raids since the operation were carried out from Lebanese territory and since two representatives of Hezbollah were serving in the government. These events prompted Israeli aerial bomb raids of both Hezbollah and Lebanese targets and a ground invasion of South Lebanon. During the conflict, one among the former's high-profile incidents was the Israeli bombing of the storage tanks at Jia power plant located 30 kilometers south of Beirut. On 13 and 15 July, the storage tanks of Jia were targeted by two strikes from the Israeli Air Force and a subsequent estimate of 12 to 15,000 tons of oil were spilled into Mediterranean Sea. The spill resulted in a 150-kilometer long oil slick along the coastline and into the Syrian Arab Republic. Israel proceeded to impose a maritime blockade, rendering it difficult for Lebanon to mitigate the effects of the spill until the month of September 2016. The results were devastating to the already fragile environment of Lebanon. The UN General Assembly stated that the spill heavily polluted the shores of Lebanon and consequently had serious implications for human health, biodiversity, fisheries. The environmental harm has been assessed by several actors such as UNEP, UNDP, and the government of Lebanon. The World Bank has published two studies quantifying the cost of the damage caused by the oil spill. Thus, there is plenty of material to assess the effect of the oil spill and even to quantify the damage in economic terms.
The GA power station oil spill was one of the worst environmental disasters in the world. So what are the environmental impacts of this case? Firstly, in this case, the Israeli forces has bombed the power station and it caused 10,000 tons of oil to be spilled into the ocean. This resulted in almost 150 kilometers of oil slick along the Lebanon and Syrian Arab Republic coast. This is extremely harmful because the oil slick is dangerous and could potentially harm marine life. The oil slick has been shown to be harmful because they can cause physical restriction of organism, and in this case, marine life. To put it simply, heavy oil may cause disruption in the respiratory system of the marine life, and as a result, the marine life could not breathe and ultimately die. Oil spills are also known to be highly toxic and highly volatile. In addition to that, another major disaster in this case was the burning of nearly 55,000 tons of storage tanks. This situation has threatened the habitats of endangered northern Atlantic bluefin tuna and green sea turtles. Moreover, the burning oil produced a toxic cloud that rained down the wind from the power station. More than 70 sites have been impacted, from private to public beaches as well as historic and cultural tourism sites.
Now, I will talk about the classification of disaster. Basically, the GF power station oil spill is a man-made disaster. Why? First of all, it is because this disaster happened when a conflict arose between Hezbollah and Israel. This resulted in heavy aerial bombing of Lebanon. This war lasted 4 weeks and peace was reached. However, the military blockade by air, sea, and land lasted weeks beyond the formal end of war. Many citizens were killed and damages were caused to the Lebanese economy, infrastructure, and environment. The attacks were clearly initiated by humans. As the name inferred, it is classified as a man-made disaster since it happened over an act committed by man. In addition, the damage of storage tanks of heavy fuel oil into the eastern Mediterranean Sea made the situation worse as cleanup efforts could not begin until the conflict ended, so the oil slick continued to spread and affected the coastline. This is the deal about man-made disaster. Unlike natural disaster, they are determined by natural forces that people have little to no influence over. However, people can get ready and learn how to survive because natural disasters usually happen after a series of events. On the flip side, since this is a man-made disaster, nobody set up any preparation beforehand as they did not see this coming at all. It just happened all of a sudden and took a huge toll on property and life. To sum this up, the GF Power Station oil spill is a man-made disaster and it is proven by the report from the United Nations Environment Programme. Besides, the country's environment minister said the Israeli planes purposely hit the tanks which are the closest to the sea. This clearly shows that this incident is caused by human activity.
I'd like to present to you the methods used in tackling the issue as well as who was responsible in doing so. Firstly, I would like to lay out the efforts done by the United Nations. The first one that I would like to point out is the report that they have drafted. This report was done by the United Nations Developmental Program and it highlighted the damages and potential hazard that this oil slick can bring. Secondly, the United Nations called upon Israel not only to acknowledge the damages that they have done, but also to take responsibility in the remnants of the attack. Thirdly, the United Nations also offered technical support towards Lebanon's Ministry of Environment in hopes that it can give proper measurements of the damages. And fourth, the United Nations brought this case to court. Now, moving on to the other NGOs, we can see Greenline's efforts. Greenline actually offered an assessment and a unit response leader from Alaska's Pipeline Company Services in hopes to lessen the burden of the Lebanon's Ministry of Environment. And the assessment that they have published is named Oil Emergency Response and Perseverance Plans for Lebanon, as well as monitoring the oil slick cleanup that was done by many locals as well as many agencies. Now I would like to move on to the laws that were applied during the case hearing. Principle 7 of the Declaration of the Conference implied that all states will try their utmost best to preserve the environment and not cause any pollution to the sea as well to any forms of environment, which obviously Israel has done by bombing the power plant. And the second law that can be applied is Principle 16 of the Rios Declaration of Environmental and Development. Now we can see in this principle, it has stated that each polluting country will take responsibility and the cost that it has done to the damaged state.
I'll be explaining on the aftermath of the disaster, specifically on settlement and resolution. The settlement for the case of GF Power Station oil spill is settled out of court, but it is assisted by the United Nations with a lot of mechanism and effort to deal with the disaster through 11 series of UN resolutions. Among the focuses on the resolution are acknowledge the destruction of the attack and its implication on living things, urge the government of Israel to take responsibility by compensating the government of Lebanon sufficiently for the cost of restoring the environmental damages, especially on environment of marine. Emphasize the needs in aiding and raising funds for the government of Lebanon to member states and all of the organization. The conduct of relevant study to measure the environmental damages for the government of Lebanon and neighboring states had suffered for so long. Moving on to the compensation, the United Nations General Assembly states that government of Israel has to compensate Lebanon $850 million in damages for the oil spill caused by Israel's strike in 2006 with a vote of 170. Several regulations and laws can be seen in this case, such as international humanitarian law, United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and lastly, Stockholm Declaration. The regulation mentioned mostly refers to the wrong conduct of the government of Israel. For example, according to international humanitarian law on its fundamental rules, states that the parties to conflict shall differentiate between civilians and soldiers. It brings the meaning that civilians cannot be attacked, but the strike from Israel caused 1,150 civilian deaths, 3,700 civilian injuries, and the creation of nearly 1 million refugees. Apart from that, the rules also state the prohibition of using weapons or methods of warfare that can result in major loss and undesired suffering. Israel is clearly subjected to guilt.
Relevant IEL principles that have been used and explanation on two principles that have been applied in this case is polluter pays principle. This particular principle has been specifically mentioned in the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development under Principle 16, which emphasized that the polluter should pay for the cost of destruction that they have caused at the public interest. The burden of remedies here must lie over the perpetrator. Some delimitation to this case have to be made in order to reach meaningful result in assessing the compatibility of the available remedies with the polluter pays principle. This principle, however, mainly serves as an action to put the right party to carry the financial burden as a way to compensate for the cost of environmental harm and restoration. In the case of Gulf spill, it applied the polluter pays principle as the worst oil spill case in history. It caused a massive wipe out of marine life and sea pollutants. Until today, the effect is still affecting the sea. It happened because of an operation of oil companies when suddenly an explosion blew out due to dangerous substances that consisted of a concrete mixture containing nitrogen gas, and the court installed cannot bear its pressure. The court held that the principle of polluter pays addresses the polluter's responsibility for the remedies for which they pollute and to compensate the cost of pollution. The oil company is responsible for the incident. As already stated, Israel has been asked by the United Nations to pay on its behalf a compensation of over $850 million over the damage that it had caused. Here we can see that the principle of polluter pays adhere to put the perpetrator country in charge and to pay for the cost of what they've done. This is in a way to penalize the country who have caused environmental harm as a way to subject them to criminal liability. Perhaps the rationale of this principle being used is to show an act of remorse. However, Israel in this case infamously refused to pay for the causes, defeating the purpose of the principle itself.
The next principle that is used in this case is the no harm principle. This principle provided a good understanding on the impacts of the destruction marine pollution caused by the Israelis' attack and the aftermath Lebanon had to suffer. It laid down an obligation to the state not to cause transboundary damages. This is a serious prohibition for the state to not do anything within their territories or shared space without the consent of the other state. The state does not entitled to have a choice. State within their capabilities and relevant mechanisms need to prevent transboundary damage. So, if the state breaches the obligation, the responsibility toward its action is laid upon the state. In the case of Corfu Channel, the court laid down the principle that each state is obligated not to cause its territory to be used for contravention of the right for other states. With respect to the Corfu Channel, Albania was obligated to alert that its territorial waters were being exploited. In the GF power station oil spill case, the government of Israel's attack amounted to a wrongful act of a state. Israel, as the polluter state, has to assure that responsibility under International Law Commission on Responsibility of State for internationally wrongful act. The government needs to give compensation for the damages that have been done. Lebanon and its government have the right to bring the case to the court and claim reparation. In this case, Israel should not raid the coast of Lebanon no matter how the situation is because the land was sovereign to Lebanon. It is clear that they crossed the line and broke the principle.